Ask anyone how they're doing, and there's a good chance you'll hear, good but busy. We're all busy, seemingly all the time, and our lives are often dominated by the drive to get things done, to be productive. And yet, all too often, our drive toward productivity can lead us feeling discouraged and burned out. My guest today is Ávila, and she wants to help Christians recover a distinctly Christian approach to productivity. A productivity rooted in the finished work of Christ on our behalf and our new identity as children of God. In our conversation, she emphasizes that we each have just the right time we need to do what God wants us to do, walking through several key productivity principles that will help us make good decisions, manage our time wisely, and make the most of what God has given us, all for His glory. Ana works as a senior writer for the Spanish edition of the Gospel Coalition and is the creator and host of the Piensa Podcast. She has an undergraduate degree in clinical biochemistry, a diploma in biblical studies, and is the author of Make the Most of Your Productivity, a guide to honoring God with your time from Crossway. Let's get started. Well, Ana, thank you so much for joining us on the Crossway Podcast today.
No, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So it sometimes seems to me that that people can be divided into two categories. Those who read productivity books and those who don't read productivity books. And yet you open your new book on productivity, making the case that this is something that all Christians should think about, at least to some extent. Why is that?
Well, productivity can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. But really what productivity is just learning how to best use the resources you have, like how to use your time, your energy, your attention, your skills. And we all have time, attention, energy, skills, and we want to use them well. So that's what productivity is about. We don't want to waste our lives. We don't want to waste our time. So I think we all should think how to make the best use we can of them.
Yeah. So you have a lot going on in your life. You're an author, you're an editor, you're a speaker. You're very involved in helping Christians think about the intersection of faith and science. You're fluent in both Spanish and English. You have a popular YouTube channel with lots of videos. You have a podcast. And then on top of all of that, something I found very interesting, I kind of wish we could do a whole interview about this. You have a degree in clinical biochemistry.
Yes.
What is that, really quickly?
Really, it's the best way I can translate it. In Spanish, is químico, biólogo, clínico, which literally translates chemist, biologist, clinician.
Okay.
So it's basically everything that happens in a medical lab. All the medical testing and things like that we know how to do. So that's what I studied in college.
So you have all these things. I think you're obviously a pretty busy person. You got a lot of interests. And so I think it kind of makes sense that someone like you would be really interested in this topic of productivity. But I wonder, could you speak to a little bit where that came from? Did it arise from just like the fullness of your life, or is this something that kind of has gone back before even some of that, this interest?
Well, productivity is something that I've always thought about because I've always been sort of an overachiever, I guess. I grew up just doing a ton of different things. My parents always told me that I will not leave you with anything. I will not leave you a house. I will not leave you any money. I will leave you your education. That's all you're going to get. So you try to make the most of it. So I was involved in mathematics and chemistry and in singing and dancing and theater and all things my parents would sign up me for every activity. So I always wanted to know more and learn more and have more skills. And I wanted to do my work well. When I was a student, I wanted to be a good student. And when I became a professional, I wanted to do my work well. So I've always been interested in the topic of productivity. I've always wanted to learn how to make the best use of my time and how to organize my projects. So it was a very personal interest. I began writing in my blog in 2014, and I started writing on reading and books, but I never thought about writing about productivity. It was just a personal interest. And then I realized that I had productivity wrong because I started to realize that no matter how much I tried, how much I succeeded, how much accolades I got, that would never be enough. It was always defeating. If I worked really hard and got the thing I wanted, I would be like 5 seconds later, okay, what's next?
Yeah.
What's the next big thing? Or if I didn't get the thing I wanted, I would be completely defeated. Like, I'm the worst. I am not good. And it was one specific instance where I was recording another podcast and it bombed. It was so bad. It was embarrassingly bad. I hope nobody ever finds that.
So we won't put a link in the show notes.
No, there's not going to be a link. And I was so defeated. God, I was praying and crying. God, I'll never speak again. I'll never write again. I don't want to do this. Why? And then like an hour later, no, this is not a joke. Like my boss, I was at Coalición, the Gospel Coalition in Spanish already. I was a writer and editor there. And he was like, okay, Anna, we're going to record a podcast on blah, blah, blah. And he was not like asking, do you want to be on it? He was telling me like, okay, we're going to do this. And I just hang up and I was like, fine, God, I'll do it. And along this time, I was reading the book, The Freedom of Self-Forgetfulness by Tim Keller.
Yeah, wonderful book.
It's a book that I don't tire myself recommending to everyone. And it's a book about how the Apostle Paul was able to just be centered in what Jesus had done and the good things he did. His successes didn't make him boast, and his failures didn't crush him because he was secure in what Jesus had done for him. And then like in that moment, everything like clicked for me. Oh, I'm doing the productivity thing wrong. I'm using productivity to try to accomplish things, to try to become someone, to try to feel like I did enough, instead of remembering that Jesus did everything and Jesus is enough. And from that security and wholeness that I find in the gospel, then I can use productivity to serve, to love, not caring about how well I do. Of course, I want to do my best, but at the end of the day, it's not about me, about how smart I am, how successful I am. It's about God and what He's doing. So that's when I decided to start thinking a little bit more about productivity from a like biblical gospel-centered perspective, and I started thinking about the book.
Yeah. I want to read a quote from the book. You write, "Our lives are not valuable because of all the things that we accomplish. Our lives are valuable because of all the things that God has accomplished on our behalf. And once we understand that, we are free to be truly productive." And I thought that quote was interesting because it hits on this tension that we can sometimes feel as Christians. On the one hand, we know that we have this responsibility to use our gifts, to use our time and our talents responsibly. And yet we also often emphasize as Christians the need to wait on God, to trust Him to produce the good fruit that we're looking for, perhaps. And you might call it the kind of let go and let God mindset that we sometimes hear in our culture as well. So how do you hold these two Christian impulses together, that we want to be responsible creatures, but we also want to let God be God?
Yeah. I think the key is just looking at Jesus, at God. Like when you are every day learning about who God is, what He has done, what He calls us to do, you're driven to work and work well. In Matthew, Jesus tells us like we're here on a mission. You're not here to just hang out and just be comfortable. You're here to preach the gospel, to make disciples, and that impulse is in our hearts. So it's very natural for us to want to do things. God has given us talents, has given us passions, has given us a brain, energy to do things. We're not made to just sit down. That's very natural. And the gospel, when we are looking at Jesus, it just drives us forward to do things. But at the same time, looking at God gives us peace and just rest and be able to do our best and then stop, knowing that God will take care of the results. So I find that just looking at God, what He has done, what He has said, what He has called us to do, gives us both the impulse to do good work for His glory and also the rest we need to. Don't worry about the results, because in the Bible we see so many people that worked very hard and saw no results. And that didn't mean that God wasn't using them. It was just they weren't able to see the fruits on their lifetime.
Yeah.
And that's okay. So just looking at God for that impulse and for that rest.
Is there one of those tendencies, though, that you can still kind of struggle to hold, together? Are you more wired towards working hard? Is that kind of your tendency?
Definitely. I am just, as I said before, since I was little, an overachiever. I just wanted to do things and do them well and feel like I was improving, I guess. One person asked me once, like, what's your my biggest strength, I think, is my impulse to always be growing and improving. Like I want to know more, understand more, be better, do better. And at the same time, and then she asked me, what's your greatest weakness? That same thing, because it's never enough. You're never good enough. You're never satisfied with the things you know, with the things you do. So yeah, I definitely tend to to the overworking side of the equation.
Yeah. So in the book, you explore 6 core principles related to our productivity that Christians should be thinking about. I wonder if you could just briefly walk us through each of those principles.
Yes, let me see if I remember. And in English, you can help me if I don't. Okay, the first one is time, is to understand the fact that we do have the time we need to do the things we need to be doing. It's usually like people say, oh, I don't have the time. And that's like the number one thing people complain about. And to me, in Ephesians 2:10, we are told that God has prepared good works for us. And I don't think God is, okay, Anna, here you have 36 hours of good works that I've prepared for you today. You figure it out. God knows that I'm limited. And that ties actually to the next principle, which is limits. You don't have to do it all. You can't do it all. I mean, you can't. No matter how much you study, you won't be able to know everything. No matter how organized you are with your time, you will not be able to catch all the meetings, do all the courses. No matter how much you try to help everybody, you won't be able to cover every need. So you can't do it all. You have to understand and embrace as good the fact that you're a limited creature. You've been put in a specific place at a specific time with a specific giftings, and that's a good thing. And the next principle is the principle of decisions. You don't have to do it all. You can make wise decisions based on the Word of God in prayer, with the help of wise Christians that are around you, to try to figure out which are those good works that God has prepared for you. Now that you've considered that He has prepared good works and you have the time you need to accomplish them, and that you don't have to do every good work in the world, then you can make decisions, and you're going to mess up. We all do. I would like God to send me an email every morning of, here are your good works for today.
Here's your agenda.
Yes, that doesn't happen. God is wanting us to have a life of wisdom, and I think that's intentional, because that forces us to constantly go to the Word of God in prayer, to seek counsel of other people, so we're not just with our little to-do list that flew down from heaven and just checking things off. We need to be constantly going to the Word, to prayer, and to the church. And then we have the principle of
Focus.
Oh, that's one of my favorites. It doesn't matter if you craft the perfect to-do list. If you don't focus on the things you have to do, you'll get lost. You won't be able to accomplish anything. And something that's fascinating to me is that people want to be 2 places at once all the time. And we know physically we can't, but mentally we pretend we can, like with multitasking or with our phones. It's like we're listening to a sermon and at the same time we're checking messages.
Totally.
So we want to be 2 places at once. You can't. And you won't be able to accomplish things in an excellent manner if you are trying to go beyond that limit of you can be in only 1 place at once. So we need to learn how to focus and actually put all our energy into the task that God has put before us. And then we have habits, that principle that is not about big changes like once in your lifetime, but small steps in the right direction. I just love there's a quote by Annie Dillard, I think. I don't remember who it was exactly, but it's something about how we spend our days is the way we spend our lives. So it's like the little things we do in the everyday that build up to a lifetime of holiness or of just recklessness. So we need to be careful of the habits we are building in the everyday. And finally, what most people think about when we talk about productivity is tools, but it's the last thing. Yes, because it really doesn't matter. I mean, a productive person can be productive with pen and paper. You don't need big apps and systems, and people just get caught up in all of that. Like, Anna, what's like the best agenda or paper planner or like the app you use? It's like, that doesn't matter. You just need to build your character, be aware of your limitations, pray for wisdom so you know what good works God has set out before you. Focus on them and do it that every day. And then you can organize your things with an app or with a planner. That doesn't matter.
So I want to go back and talk about a couple of these in a little bit more detail. Let's start with that first one, time.
Yes.
As I read this chapter and thought about this, I kept thinking the main way that I probably answer the question that I get a lot, we all get, how are you doing? Right? How's life going for you? Probably the main way I answer it is like, it's good, but really busy. Like we always are constantly saying that about our lives. We're just so busy. It's so much to do, so little time. But I really do love the way right underneath the title of the chapter, and you kind of already said it, but you just have this little line and you say, you have time to do what you should be doing.
Yeah.
It's just so simple. You have time to do what you should be doing. It's so simple and yet so profound. I wonder if you could just unpack that a little bit more for us.
It is true we don't have the time to do everything we want to be doing. The problem is that we want to be doing things that we shouldn't be doing. If we believe in a sovereign God who knows us, who loves us, and who has prepared good works for us, we can be rest assured that we have the time. We need to do the things that He's calling us to do. The problem is, do we really want to do the things He's calling us to do, or we want to do more? So I just find very reassuring that God is good and that God has given me tasks and that He has provided everything I need to be walking on those good works He has prepared for me. But it is very humbling that I need to recognize that I sometimes want to do a lot of things that God is not calling me to do. Maybe it's because of pride, because of fear of man, because I can't say no, because I just feel like because of my upbringing or my culture around me, I'm supposed to do these things, but we don't take the time to just stop and pray and ask God, okay, God, I'm crumbling down. I need help. I need guidance. I need wisdom. Please show me what are the things I should be doing. But we're just caught up in this like hamster wheel of activities and we don't just stop for a minute. And somebody asked me yesterday, I think, what would your advice be for somebody who says, I have no time, I'm so overwhelmed? And my advice is stop. And don't wait until that project is done. Don't wait until like next month because this is going to be over, whatever. No, just stop right now. Stop and consider how are my days looking? Am I actually like setting time aside for my family and to rest and to do the things that in the Bible are very clear I should be doing? That's a great place to start with the things you should be doing, the things that are clearly in the Bible. Yeah, you should probably be going to church. Yeah. I mean, if you don't have time for the things God is explicitly telling you in the Bible, you have to do, you're probably doing something wrong.
Yeah.
So that is something that I advise people to do, and that's why I love like the day of rest. Like this day where it's not like if you finished all your tasks for the week, then you should stop and have a day of rest. No, it's okay. It's time to rest. It's like this moment we've set aside for this specifically. So I advise people to do that every week. Just have these like moments that are in your calendar that are fixed, that it doesn't matter how crazy the week was. You can just stop and reflect and ask God, am I doing the works you've set me out to do, or am I doing more, or am I doing less? Because sometimes we feel we have too much to do, not because we're doing too much, but because we're doing things wrong. We're just half doing, like I'm half working and half texting or playing something on my phone. And then when it's time to actually deliver the thing, well, the thing that could have taken me 2 hours took me like 11 because I was half working, half not.
Yeah, that gets to that focus one as well. So one of the things that you say in this chapter, you warn of a danger of if-only statements. When it comes to our time, you write, they are the words that make us look longingly at an imaginary world in which things are just a little different while time slips through our fingers. What are some of the if-onlys that you've wrestled with in your life?
Oh, well, when my kid was a baby, he wouldn't sleep and he would be crying all the time. So it was very easy to go, oh, if only he would sleep better. If he didn't cry that much, I could get some peace, get some actual rest done. I could read my Bible more. I could go exercise. I don't know. So it's very tempting to use your circumstances as an excuse to not do what you know you should be doing and the way you should be doing it. And don't get me wrong, when you are in a specific season of life with with like a baby, for example, yes, it means you will not be able to do as many things as you did before. But it's not about just longing for this moment where things will get better and now I'll be able to be productive. It's like, okay, in this season that is challenging, that is very limiting in many aspects, how can I do the best with the things I have right now?
Yeah, we're called to productivity in every season,
Yes.
not just in
And it doesn't look
ideal.
the same. It doesn't look the same. Yeah, I probably won't be able to have a 1 hour long uninterrupted quiet time in this season, but that's not the thing that God is calling me to do. God is calling me to be in his word. How can I do that in this season? That's going to look different from when I was single or when I had no kids, and that's okay. And when the kids grow up a little bit, then I might be able to do something different. But it's a mistake to just be longing for the thing to end and then say, okay, when this is over, when this changes, I'm going to be productive. And it's not bad to pray for things to change or to try to tweak things so things are better. That's good. We can do that. God, give me wisdom to help my child sleep better. But meanwhile, I'm going to do my best. I'm not going to be just spending my days daydreaming of this thing being over.
Yeah. So let's talk about another important principle, and that's habits and the idea of habit formation. And I think, we've all probably walked through an airport or a bookstore and we just see countless books these days about habits. Clearly, there's this cultural, at least in America, I don't know if it's the same in Guatemala and Mexico, of like this just desire to make better use of our time through cultivating good habits. We see the power of those. And I think we often have misconceptions about habits and how they work. So what are some of those misconceptions that you've often encountered with in yourself, but maybe with other Christians as well?
Well, maybe the most common one is that habits take an X amount of time to be developed. Oh, I'm going to do this for 30 days and then it's going to be a habit. And really, habits, there's no rules for them. They're habits that take on really easily and depends on you too. Habits that take longer, habits that are more ingrained in us. Another that is very funny to me is that people think they don't have habits. If you haven't read that book on habits and haven't started to develop them, then you think, oh, I have no habits. It's like, no. We all have habits. These are by design in us. God has made us creatures of habit because then our brain has the space to do all the creative thinking, loving stuff we need to do. And from the beginning of our lives, we start developing this good or bad or neutral habits of how we conduct ourselves. So we need to be very careful of what practices we're letting in our daily lives, because those, even without us realizing, become the habits that shape us in the long run. And people sometimes also think that habits are just for overachievers like me that just want to improve every aspect of their life. But it really is for everyone who wants to grow. One of the things I write most about is reading. And people ask me, how can I become a reader? I want to read as many books as you, blah, blah, blah. And well, you just read a little bit every day. Just put on a timer. And it's so simple. And people think that simple things don't matter.
Yeah, sometimes we're looking for some special trick.
Yes. And I don't know, people think that they're going to wake up 10 years from now and they will have become, but by magic, I don't know, a big reader, a person who loves books, but that doesn't happen. It's just one day at a time, and then it becomes a little easier and a little easier, and it's just the simple things. And to me, that is so refreshing, so awesome that God has made us in this way, that every step in the right direction counts, and we can build on that, and we can look back, and God has done so much in me through these practices that seem in the daily so small and so insignificant.
Yeah.
But to walk in them has made me grow so much.
That's such an important emphasis that when it comes to habits, we want to make sure we're not loading too much significance and weight in any individual day's experience of that habit, right? If we're looking towards today's reading of the Bible as this has got to change my life, we're going to be disappointed.
Yes.
You kind of have to have that long view.
Yes, for sure.
I love to, one of the most penetrating things for me as I read this chapter was the way that you say we tend to set idealistic goals, often related to habit formation, without realizing that our daily practices take us in the opposite direction.
Yes.
Unpack that a little bit more for us.
Yes, it's like the reading thing. For example, if you want to be a person who is a deep thinker and that spends a lot of time in books, but you have your phone right next to you every morning, and you know that as soon as you wake up, your brain's all foggy and you're unable to focus, and the first thing you're gonna do is pick up the phone, and then you have all these apps that are addicting and entertaining, and then 2 hours go by, you're in bed still, and then you have to run and do the things of life, and then you say, okay, I didn't get to read today, but I'm sure I'll get to it tomorrow. And at the end of the day, you put your same phone in that same nightstand with the same apps, and you expect things to be different. You expect to become a reader when your environment and your daily practices are shaping you in the opposite direction. Not to be a deep thinker, but to be a shallow thinker who is just entertained all the time by the shiny things that right next to you. So we cannot fool ourselves. Another one that's very common is the habit of just sleeping well. People come up to me and they tell me, Anna, I just can't wake up early. Like, I want to do my devotional time, but I just can't get out of bed. How do you do it? I'm like, okay, what time do you want to get off bed? Like 6 a.m. maybe? Okay. And what time do you go to bed? And they just look down in shame, like 2 a.m. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not going to work.
It's not going to work.
That's not how our bodies work. We want to, in Spanish, there's a phrase, queremos nadar y permanecer secos. We want to swim and remain dry. Like,
what a good phrase.
Have our cake and eat it too. Yep. I think that's how you say it.
See, swim and keep dry makes more sense to me. I don't actually know what have your cake and eat it too even means, but.
Yeah, you want to have the cake, but you want to eat it too.
I guess so.
I mean, anyways, yes, we want to be on Netflix at 2 a.m., but we also want to be sharp and shiny at 6 a.m. reading our Bibles. And those things are in direct contradiction to each other. So,
and sometimes they're not like the same type of thing, right? Like that's a good example where there's nothing inherently wrong with watching Netflix. Yes. You know, there's nothing inherently wrong with staying up late necessarily, but those in some ways neutral types of habits we might fall into or practices we might get into can actually have a very direct negative impact on good spiritual disciplines perhaps that we're trying to cultivate.
Yeah, and sleep is so important to for a spiritual formation. I think like we need to, as well as eating and drinking well, our bodies are very important for us to be able to make wise decisions and have good self-control. We don't realize how much not taking care of our bodies affect our souls and the way we conduct ourselves in the world. So it is very important for us to check those little things we do in the everyday and ask ourselves, okay, if I do this every day for 10 years, where I'm going to end up? Just do that exercise. I have people like close their eyes, think about what you did before bed yesterday, and just imagine yourself doing exactly that for 10 years. Where are you going to end up? In a good place? In a holy place? In a more profound, your family? How's going to look your family life, your church life, your intellectual life? People like don't realize that what they do in the everyday is shaping who they are.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, another last category we'll talk about today is that of tools. And you said before you kind of want to hold that till the end because it can be easy to want to rush to tools and techniques and systems when it comes to thinking about our productivity. But with all the caveats in place, what are some of the maybe the simple tools that you found can be helpful, or how would you even approach that whole topic?
Yeah. In Latin America, I don't know how it is in the States, but people don't tend to use calendars. They just, like, you say, okay, let's grab a coffee. Oh, sure, let's do it. And then you're waiting for the person to show up. It's like, oh, I'm sorry, I forgot. So something as basic as that, we don't know how to use sometimes. But even if we do have a calendar and we put all our appointments in there, I noticed that a lot of people, for example, you have a Wednesday with 3 meetings and you have them set in your calendar, but then you wake up and you make your to-do list for the day and it's like 50 things. And then if you try to put right next to it how much time each thing is going to take me?
Yeah.
And then you add like
that.
15 minutes because we're always very optimistic about how much time things are. How much time? How do you say that?
How long things will take?
Exactly. Thank you. I'm sorry. Then you add things up and it's like you don't have, even if you don't sleep, you don't have enough time to do it all. So we sometimes delude ourselves into thinking that we can do all these things. And I try to have people do an exercise with their calendars where they just have their calendar for the day and all the meetings, then add your sleeping time, then add your eating times, your devotional if you want to have one, add your commuting times, and then take your to-do list, add the times, and then try to fit things.
Yeah, where's that going to fit?
Yeah.
So some of the whole, it sounds like this kind of approach to it is really helping us to even ask, like, are we trying to do too much,
Yes.
right? Like, and that has this kind of boomerang effect of discouraging us when we inevitably can't end up doing all of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so even just plotting out our days can be a helpful exercise.
Yeah, it's like a budget, but for your time. I think there's a quote by Donald Whitney where he said, if people used their money as they use their time, we would think they're crazy, because it's like, oh, $100 for you here and $1,000 for you there, and then you get out to the end of the month and you're like, okay, I have no money for rent or for the important things.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't do that. You see how much money you get and the things you have to pay, and then you see, okay, I have that much left, I can do this or I can do that. But with time, we don't do that. We just say yes until we're collapsing, and that's not wise.
All right, so after you walk through these principles, you kind of have three practices or categories of practices that kind of arise out of those principles. You start with the macro, thinking about your whole life. You move to the midterm, planning out a week. And then you look at the micro, making the most of your day. I wonder if you could just briefly walk us through that progression.
Yeah, in the first chapter of that section, I just have people think about what direction they think God is asking them to move forward. Like, people have dreams, and that's great. We all want to do great things for God. And by great things, I don't mean like, oh, become famous or make a lot of money, but do good with our lives.
Yeah.
And be of impact to the people God allows us to make an impact to. So we need to sit down and actually plan for those dreams in prayer with the counsel of people who are wise and godly. But we need to sit down and say, okay, I want to be a missionary. How's that going to work? I need to raise funds. I need to research on that country I'm planning.
This is actually what you and your husband have done.
Yeah.
You both were born in Mexico, but you now serve as missionaries in Guatemala.
Yeah, we didn't do well, though. Like, that planning, I wrote the book after that, so it's a lot of my mistakes that I'm learning from there. Because, yes, you need to just sit down and create a sketch of what the next years you think are going to look like, and that will help you make the decisions for the things you can take on and the things you can't. Like, if I want to be a missionary to Guatemala, then I cannot say yes to this overseas program in another part of the world, right? I cannot focus my energy on that. I need to focus my energy in this thing. So that's like the big picture. And then the weekly review, it ties a lot to the stopping thing we were talking about before. It's just a weekly practice of, no matter how your week went, if you checked off all the boxes or if everything was chaos, you just stop and pray and assess what the last week was and how the next week is going to look like. And then you make decisions. Is this working? Is this not? Am I taking too much? Am I taking too little? Should I cancel this or should I move that around? Should I ask forgiveness? That's a big thing that is humiliating for everyone. Is like, hey, I said yes. I say I would do this, but I didn't. I'm sorry. I overcommitted myself, and offer options to just make amends and fix the thing you messed up. But that's humiliating, and sometimes we just want to pretend it didn't happen. We just ghost people and things like that. So stopping every week is a great practical spiritual practice of just, okay, getting ready for rest. That's a big thing too. I do it before my day of rest, so I just know that I can actually rest. I'm not thinking about, all the due dates and the deadlines.
Process the week before that. Yeah.
Yes. And then on the daily, it's just about habits and daily practices that allows you to stay in track and to, if things go south, how do you react? How do you just get back in track? And yeah, that's what that section is about.
Yeah, it's so kind of simple and in some ways pretty straightforward. Like we kind of know these things, but sometimes the challenge is actually doing it.
Yes.
Actually starting. So maybe as a final question, what encouragement would you give to the person who they're looking at their own life and they would say, yeah, I just feel like I've messed up on a lot of this stuff. I don't have good habits. I waste my time. I don't feel like very productive. I'm not good at this. And I just kind of feel discouraged in that. What would you say to that person?
I will say God is for you. God is the most interested person in seeing Christ in you. He wants us to be productive, not in the toxic, do it all, always work kind of way, but in the godly way, in the way that you use the things God has given you, your talents, your energy, your attention, your time, and you use it well for His glory and the good of your neighbor. He's one that is more interested than you, even than you. So that's always encouraging to me, that He is for me. He's not like in a cloud in the sky waiting for me to mess up. He is given me everything I need. He has given me Christ, who through His sacrifice gave me a new heart that now wants the things of God. He has given me His Spirit, His Word, His church. I have everything I need to walk faithfully, and that's so encouraging. Yeah. And when we mess up, and we will continue to fail, we can run to Him. He has open arms. He has grace abundant for us, and we can keep going every day, one step at a time.
Anna, thank you so much for talking with us today and helping us all think a little bit more biblically about this topic of productivity.
Thank you for having me.
That was Ana Ávila on honoring God with our time. For more, be sure to grab a copy of her book, Make the Most of Your Productivity, a guide to honoring God with your time. Pick up a print copy of the book for 30% off, or get the ebook or audiobook for 50% off directly from Crossway by visiting crossway.org/plus. If you liked this interview, check out my conversation with Brian Chappell entitled Why Your Job Has Meaning and Purpose, Even If You Don't Like It. Follow the link in the show notes to hear us discuss why the work you do day in and day out matters to God, probably more than you realize. You can also find a link to other interviews we've done related to work, time management, and productivity. For more audio content like this, subscribe to the Crossway Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast player. If you enjoyed this episode, consider sharing it with a friend and leaving us a review. Crossway is a not-for-profit Christian ministry that exists solely for the purpose of proclaiming the truth of God's Word through publishing gospel-centered content. Visit us today at crossway.org.